Hi everyone, welcome back. And today we'll be talking about AQA A-Level Sociology, and the topic is beliefs in society. For those who don't know, I'm a first year sociology student at Durham University, so that means this time last year, I was in fact a year 13 sitting my exams the same as you. First of all, I just want to say good luck for the upcoming exams. I'm sure you're all going to do amazing, and let's just say you're in safe hands, you're in the right place. Thank you also for your patience for this video. I know it's been highly anticipated and I've taken a while, but hey, I'm here now. I promise I'll be here on time. But yeah, let's just get straight into it because this video is going to be a long one. So, as with all my other videos, I like showing how the paper will be structured. So, you're not walking into the exam going, what's this? Why does it look like that? And this is especially important for paper two because paper two is the option topic paper. So, if you're doing beliefs, which I'm assuming you are because you're watching this video, you will need to look for topic B1. So, this will be the second half of your paper and you'll be answering 3 questions as part of this section. 2 of those will be 10 markers, and 1 of those will be a 20 marker. And then I just like showing the AQA spec. I'm not going to read this out, but take the time to read it if you'd like. But I've used this spec to help me make this video because it's all the things that AQA says that you need to know for the exam. And from this, I've compiled it into 7 main points. And these points will be time stamped, I don't know if you can see, along the bottom of this video. So if there's a certain section that you'd like to watch, if you feel underconfident for it, like you just want to have a little refresher, go ahead. I won't expect you to watch this whole video because, like I said, it's going to be a long one. So, without further ado, let's just get right into it and start with our first topic, which is theories of religion. So, to start with, it's a good idea to actually have an understanding of what is religion. So, a broad definition would be that religion is the belief in and worship of a superhuman power or powers, especially a god or a gods. In sociology, there are 3 main ways to define religion: substantive, functional, and constructive. So, substantive. Substantive focuses on the content or substance of religious belief, such as a belief in God or the supernatural. This view draws a clear line between religious and non religious beliefs. To be a religion, a set of beliefs must include belief in a God or the supernatural. They conform to a widespread view of religion as belief in God. Religion is the belief in a superior or supernatural power that is above nature and cannot be explained scientifically, which was said by Max Weber. Substantive definitions are accused of Western bias because they exclude religions such as Buddhism, which do not have Western ideas of God. Whereas functional defines religion in terms of social or psychological functions it performs for individuals or society. Religion is defined in terms of the contribution it makes to social integration rather than any specific belief in God or the supernatural. Religion performs functions for individuals, such as answering ultimate questions about the meaning of life and what happens when we die. An advantage of functional definitions is that they are inclusive, allowing us to include a wide range of beliefs and practices that perform functions such as integration. However, just because an institution helps integrate individuals into groups, this does not make it a religion. For example, collective chanting at football matches might give individuals a sense of integration, but this does not mean it is a religion. And then we have constructionist. Social constructionists take an interpretivist approach that focuses on how members of society themselves define religion. They argue that it is not possible to produce a single universal definition of religion, since the meaning of religion varies across individuals and groups. Social constructionists are interested in how definitions of religion are constructed, challenged, and fought over. For example, Aldrich shows how, for its followers, Scientology is a religion. However, several governments have denied it legal status as a religion and sought to ban it, showing how definitions of religion can be contested and are influenced by who has power to define the situation. However, social constructionists see religion not as fixed belief in God or having a universal function, but as meanings people themselves create. Yet, this makes it impossible to generalize about the nature of religion, since people may have widely differing views about what counts as religion. So, looking at functionalist theories of religion, For functionalists, society is a system of interrelated parts or social institutions, such as religion. Society's most basic need is the need for social order and solidarity, so that its members can cooperate. For functionalists, what makes order possible is the existence of value consensus. Without this, individuals would pursue their own selfish desires and society would disintegrate. Functionalists argue that religion reinforces value consensus and social solidarity by providing shared beliefs and collective rituals that bind individuals together. Through worship ceremonies and moral teachings, religion creates a common ground of values that guides behaviour and strengthens social cohesion. By promoting unity and a sense of belonging, it helps maintain order and stability within society. And then, of course, we couldn't look at functionalism without hearing Durkheim's opinion, and he talks about the sacred and the profane. The sacred are things set apart from forbidden, that inspire feelings of awe, fear, and wonder, and are surrounded by taboos and prohibitions. However, the profane are things that have no specific significance, things that are ordinary and mundane. Furthermore, a religion is never simply a set of beliefs. It also involves definite rituals or practices in relation to the sacred, and these rituals are collective, performed by social groups. And examples of sacred in religion would be objects or festivals, so for example, the cross in Christianity or the festival Diwali celebrated in Hinduism. Durkheim argued that sacred symbols evoke strong feelings because they represent something powerful, society itself. When people worship these symbols, they are really worshipping society. Although symbols differ across religions, they all serve the same purpose, bringing believers together into one moral community. And then he also spoke about totemism. Durkheim argued that religion's essence is seen in its simplest form, clan society. Durkheim studied the Arunta and Aboriginal clan society to understand religion. Arunta clans consist of bands of kin who come together periodically to perform rituals involving worship of a sacred totem. The totem is a clan's emblem, such as an animal or a plant that symbolises the clan's origins and identity. So here are an example of some of the totems, which is a kangaroo, an ant, or a grub. Rituals around the totem bring kin together, reinforcing solidarity and belonging. Durkheim argued that when clans worship their totem, they are really worshipping society. The totem inspires awe because it represents the group's power on which individuals depend. In Durkheim's view, the sacred symbols represent society's collective conscience. For Durkheim, regular shared religious rituals reinforce collective consciousness and maintain social integration. Participating in shared rituals binds individuals together, reminding them they are part of a single moral community to which they owe their loyalty to. Also, reminding the individual the power of society. They themselves are nothing. And this is why I've put a picture of a jigsaw, because it's like everyone's part of the puzzle, but the bigger picture is overall God's plan, if that makes sense. In this sense, religion also performs an important function for the individual. By making us feel part of something greater than ourselves, religion strengthens us to face life's trials and motivates us to overcome obstacles that would otherwise defeat us. Durkheim also sees religion as a source of our intellectual or cognitive capacities. For example, in order to think at all, we need categories such as time, space, cause, substance, number, etc. And secondly, to share our thoughts, we need to use the same categories as others. Durkheim views religion as the origin of the concepts and categories we need for reasoning, understanding the world and communicating. In their book, Primitive Classification, Durkheim and Moss argue that religion provides basic categories such as time, space, and causation, for example, with ideas about being a creator bringing the world into being at the beginning of time. Similarly, the division of tribes into clans gives humans their first notion of classification. Thus, for Durkheim, religion is the origin of human thought, reason, and science. And then again, for those who don't know, when I have the AO3s, I normally just let you read them yourselves. This is mostly just to save time in the video, and also at some points AO3s can be kind of repetitive because sometimes it's like surface level where it's like the direct flip side of what I've already just said. So it just saves time. Malinowski agrees with Durkheim that religion promotes solidarity, However, in his view, it does so by performing psychological functions for individuals, helping them cope with emotional stress that would undermine social solidarity. Malinowski identifies two types of situations in which religion performs this role. Number one, where the outcome is important but is uncontrollable and therefore uncertain. In studying of the Trobriand Islanders of the Western Pacific, Malinowski contrasts fishing in the lagoon and fishing in the ocean. Lagoon fishing is safe and uses the same predictable and successful method. When the islanders fish in the lagoon, there is no ritual. Ocean fishing, however, is dangerous and is always accompanied by canoe magic, which is their form of a ritual. This gives people a sense of control which eases tension, giving them confidence to undertake hazardous tasks and reinforces group solidarity. And second, at times of life crises, events such as birth, puberty, marriage, and especially death mark major and disruptive changes in social groups. Religion helps to minimize disruption. For example, the funeral rituals reinforce a feeling of solidarity amongst the survivors, while the notion of immortality gives comfort to the bereaved by denying the fact of death. In fact, Malinowski argues that death is the main reason for the existence of religious belief. And then, of course, another opinionated functionalist would be, of course, Talcott Parsons. Like Malinowski, Parsons sees religion helping individuals to cope with unforeseen events and uncontrollable outcomes. In addition, Parsons identifies two other essential functions that religion performs in modern society. One, it creates and legitimates society's central values, and two, it is the primary source of meaning. Religion creates and legitimates society's basic norms and values by sacralizing them. For example, in the United States, Protestantism has sacralized the core American values of individualism, meritocracy, and self discipline. This serves to promote value consensus and social stability. Religion also provides a source of meaning. It answers ultimate questions about the human condition, such as why the good suffer and why some die young. Such events defy our sense of justice and make life appear meaningless, and this may undermine our commitment to society's values. Religion provides answers to such questions, for example, by explaining suffering as a test of faith that will be rewarded in heaven. By doing so, religion enables people to adjust to adverse events or circumstances and helps maintain stability. Like Parsons, Bella is interested in how religion unifies society, especially a multi-faith society like America. What unifies American society is an overarching civil religion, a belief system that attaches sacred qualities to society itself. In the American case, civil religion is a faith in Americanism or the American way of life. Bella argues that a civil religion integrates society in a way that America's many different churches cannot. American civil religion involves loyalty to the nation state and a belief in God, both of which are equated with being a true American. It is expressed in various rituals, symbols, and beliefs, such as the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, singing the national anthem, and phrases such as one nation under God. However, this is not a specific God, but rather an American God. It sacralizes the American way of life and binds together Americans from many different ethnic and religious backgrounds. Functional alternatives to religion are non-religious beliefs and practices that perform functions similar to those of organized religions, such as reinforcing shared values or maintaining social cohesion. For example, although in America civil religion involves a belief in God, Bella argues that this doesn't have to be the case. Some other belief systems could perform the same functions. For example, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union had secular political beliefs and rituals around which they sought to unite society. The issues with functional alternatives is similar to the issues with functional definitions of religion. Both focus only on what religion does for society and ignores what makes religion unique, the fact that it involves belief in the supernatural. Functionalism emphasizes the social nature of religion and the positive functions it performs, but it neglects negative aspects such as religion as a source of oppression of the poor or women. It ignores religion as a source of division and conflict, especially in complex modern societies where there is more than one religion. For example, Northern Ireland, where there is religious pluralism, it is hard to see how it can unite people and promote integration. The idea of civil religion overcomes this problem to some extent by arguing that societies may still have an overarching belief system shared by all. But is this really religion, especially if it's not based in the supernatural? So now we're looking at Marxist theories of religion. Marx's theory of religion needs to be seen in the context of all societies divided into two classes, one of which exploits the labour of the other. Marxism sees religion as a feature only of class-divided society. As such, there will be no need for religion in classless society and it will disappear. For Marx, ideology is a belief system that distorts people's perceptions of realities in ways that serve the interests of the ruling class. He argues that the class that controls economic production also controls the production and distribution of ideas in society through institutions such as the church. He believes that religion operates as an ideological weapon used by the ruling class to legitimate the suffering of the poor as something inevitable and God given. Religion misleads the poor into believing that suffering is virtuous and they will be favoured in the afterlife. This creates false consciousness, preventing the poor from acting to change their situation. Similarly, Lenin describes religion as spiritual gin, an intoxicant doled out to the masses by the ruling class to confuse them and keep them in their place. In Lenin's view, the ruling class use religion cynically to manipulate the masses and keep them from attempting to overthrow the ruling class by creating a mystical fog that obscures reality. Religion also legitimates the power and privilege of the dominant class by making their position appear to be divinely ordained. For example, in the 16th century, the idea of the divine right of kings was the belief that the king is God's representative on earth and is owed total obedience. Disobedience is not just illegal, but also a sinful challenge to God's authority. Marx also sees religion as a product of alienation. Alienation involves becoming separated from or losing control over something that one has produced or created. Under capitalism, workers experience alienation, lacking freedom to express their true nature as creative beings. In dehumanizing mundane working conditions, the exploited turn to religion as a form of consolidation. And one of Marx's most famous quotes is, of course, religion is the opium of the people. It is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, the soul of a soulless condition, the spirit of a spiritless situation. Religion acts as an opiate to dull the pain of exploitation, but just as opium masks pain rather than treating its cause, so religion masks the underlying problem of exploitation that creates a need for it. Because religion is a distorted view of the world, it can offer no solution to earthly misery. Instead, its promises of afterlife creates an illusory happiness that distracts attention from the true source of the suffering, that is capitalism. Religion also acts as an ideology that legitimates both the suffering of the poor and the privileges of the ruling class. And then again, here's the AO3s for Marxism, so let me have a quick look there. So we are now looking at feminist theories of religion. Many feminists regard religion as a patriarchal institution that reflects and reinforces this inequality. Religious belief functions as a patriarchal ideology that legitimates female subordination. And there's two very different sides to this. So the first side being radical feminists, which argue that religion is a core tool of patriarchal control, enforcing rigid, unequal gender roles. Whereas liberal feminists highlight how women are gaining equality within existing religious structures, challenging the idea that all religious beliefs are solely for male benefit. Now, although the formal teachings of religions often stress equality between the sexes, there is considerable evidence of patriarchy within many of them. One of them being religious organisations, which are mainly male dominated, even though women often participate more than men in these organisations. For example, Orthodox Judaism and Catholicism forbid women to become priests. Armstrong sees exclusion from the priesthood as evidence of women's marginalisation. Woodhead argues that the exclusion of women from the Catholic priesthood is evidence of the Church's deep unease about the emancipation of women generally. Places of worship often segregated the sexes and marginalised women, for example, seating them behind screens while the men occupy the central and more sacred spaces. Women's participation may be restricted. Taboos that regard menstruation, pregnancy, and childbirth as polluting may also prevent participation. For example, in Islam, menstruating women are not allowed to physically touch the Quran. Holm describes this as the devaluation of women in religion. Sacred texts largely feature the doings of male gods, prophets, etc., and are usually written and interpreted by men. Stories often reflect anti female stereotypes, such as that of Eve, who, in the story of Genesis, caused humanity's fall from grace and expulsion from the Garden of Eden. Religious laws and customs may give women fewer rights than men, for example, in access to divorce, how many spouses they marry, decision making, dress codes, etc. Religious influences on cultural norms may also lead to unequal treatment, such as genital mutilation or punishment for sexual transgressions. Many religions legitimate and regulate women's traditional domestic and reproductive role. For example, the Catholic Church bans abortion and artificial contraception. And then again, I'll let you have a look at the criticisms and the AO3s for feminism and the evidence of patriarchy. Woodhead criticises feminist explanations that simply equate religion with patriarchy and the oppression of women. She argues that there are religious forms of feminism, ways in which women use religion to gain greater freedom and respect. Woodhead uses the example of the hijab or veil worn by many Muslim women. While Western feminists tend to see it as a symbol of oppression, to the wearer it may be a means of liberation. Some young British Muslim women choose to wear the hijab to gain parental approval to enter further education and employment. For them, the hijab is a symbol of liberation that allows them to enter the public sphere without being condemned as immodest. Brusco found that in Colombia, belonging to a Pentecostal group can be empowering for some women. For example, a strongly held belief among Pentecostalists is that men should respect women. This gives women power to influence men's behavior by insisting that they practice what they preach and refrain from macho behavior. Ronaldo sees this pattern as typical of piety movements. These are conservative movements that support traditional teachings about women's role, modest dress, prayer, and Bible study. They include Pentecostal and evangelical groups and some forms of non Christian religions. Like Brusco and Woodhead, Ronaldo argues that even within conservative religions, women may sometimes find ways to further their own interests. However, she notes that this is middle class urban women who are most likely to join these movements. These women may already have other resources such as education and income with which to pursue their goals. Liberal Protestant organisations are often committed to gender equality and women play leading roles. For example, a third of Unitarian ministers are female. The Church of England, the official state church in England, has had female priests since 1994 and female bishops since 2015. So, we've made it through the first topic, and now we're moving on to our second one, which is religion and social change. Religion can be seen as a conservative force in two senses. It is often traditional, defending traditional customs, institutions, moral values, roles, etc. It can uphold traditional beliefs about how society should be organised. It functions to conserve or preserve things as they are. It stabilises society and maintains the status quo. Most religions have traditional conservative beliefs about moral issues, and many of them oppose changes that would allow individuals more freedom in personal and sexual matters. For example, the Catholic Church forbids divorce, abortion, and artificial contraception. It opposes gay marriage and condemns homosexual behaviour. Similarly, most religions uphold family values and often favour a traditional patriarchal domestic division of labour. For example, the belief that the man should be the head of the family was embedded in traditional marriage ceremony, the Church of England, dating from 1602. The bride vows to love, honour, and obey, but the groom is only required to love and honour. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly show you this part. I'm not going to read it because it basically just talks about what we've spoke about in the first section, but I'll just leave it on in case you want to have a look. Sociologists have shown how religion can be a force for change, the most famous example of this view being Max Weber's study of the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism. In it, Weber argues that the religious beliefs of Calvinism helped to bring about major social change, specifically the emergence of modern capitalism in Northern Europe in the 16th and 17th centuries. Weber notes that many past societies had capitalism in the sense of greed for wealth, which they often spent on luxury consumption. However, modern capitalism is unique because it is based on a systematic, efficient, rational pursuit of profit for its own sake, rather than for consumption. Weber calls this the spirit of capitalism. According to Weber, this spirit had what he calls an eclectic affinity or unconscious similarity to the Calvinist beliefs and attitudes. So, looking at Calvinist belief further, predestination, Calvinism taught that God had already chosen the elect who would be saved long before their birth. Nothing individuals did, whether Catholic good works such as pilgrimages and charity, could alter this divine decision. Salvation was fixed and entirely beyond human influence. Divine transcendence. God was utterly beyond the human world, so no person or institution, including the Church, could claim to know his will beyond what was revealed in the Bible. This produced what Weber described as an intense inner loneliness. Calvinists could neither know or earn their salvation, leaving them in a state of deep spiritual uncertainty. Asceticism involves self denial, discipline, and abstaining from luxury. Traditionally associated with a monastic life, it requires simplicity and restraint in order to focus on devotion to God. Before Calvinism, a religious vocation meant withdrawing from ordinary life into a monastery, what Weber calls otherworldly asceticism. Calvinism transformed this into this worldly asceticism, the belief that one served God throughout discipline, methodical work, and everyday occupations. Work did not bring salvation, but it was a religious duty and the only visible way to glorify God. This produced a lifestyle of hard work, frugality, and strict self control. Idleness was sinful, and success became psychologically reassuring, going wealth appeared to signal God's favour, despite the doctrine that his will was unknowable. At the same time, Calvinists reinvested their earnings rather than spending them on luxuries, generating continuous accumulation. For Weber, this rational, disciplined reinvestment embodies the spirit of modern capitalism and help bring it into being. Weber was not arguing that Calvinist beliefs were the cause of modern capitalism, but simply that they were one of its causes. The Protestant ethic of the Calvinists was not sufficient on its own to bring modern capitalism into being, yet several material or economic factors were necessary, such as natural resources, trade, a money economy, towns and cities, a system of law, etc. On the other hand, Weber notes that there had been other societies that had had a higher level of economic development in Northern Europe had in the 16th and 17th centuries, but had still failed to develop modern capitalism. In particular, he argued that ancient China and India were materially more advanced than Europe, but capitalism did not take off there. He argued that the failure of capitalism to take off there was due to a lack of religious belief system, like that of Calvinism, that would have spurred its development. And then again, this is the evaluation of Weber. So now we're looking at religion and social protest. Like Weber, Bruce is interested in the relationship between religion and social change. Using case studies, he compares two examples of the role of religiously inspired protest movements in America that have tried to change society: the civil rights movement and the new Christian right. Bruce describes the struggle of the black civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s to end racial segregation in America as an example of religiously motivated social change. Although slavery had been abolished in 1865, black people were denied legal and political rights in many southern states where segregation was enforced. The civil rights movement began in 1955 when Rosa Parks refused to sit at the back of the bus, as black passengers were expected to do so at the time. Campaigning involved direct action by black people themselves, including protest marches, boycotts, demonstrations. Almost a decade later, in 1964, segregation was outlawed. Bruce describes the black clergy as the backbone of the movement, led by Dr. Martin Luther King. They played a decisive role giving support and moral legitimacy to the civil rights activists. Their churches provided meeting places and sanctuary for the threat of white violence, and the rituals such as prayer meetings and hymn singing were a source of unity in the face of oppression. Bruce argues that the black clergy were able to shame white people into changing the law by appealing to their shared Christian values of equality. Although the impact on white clergy in the South was limited, their message reached a wide audience outside the southern states and gained national support. Bruce argues that religion can act as an ideological resource, offering beliefs, practices, and moral authority that empower social protest. Using the civil rights movement, he shows how religious organizations support collective action and contribute to social change. The movement succeeded because its aims aligned with wider societal values and those held by people in power. Taking the moral high ground, black clergy pointed out that the hypocrisy of the white clergy who preach love thy neighbour but supported racial segregation. Channeling dissent. Religion provides channels to express political dissent. For example, the funeral of Martin Luther King was a rallying point for the civil rights cause. Acting as an honest broker, churches can provide a context for negotiating change because they are often respected by both sides in a conflict and seen as standing above mere politics. Mobilizing public opinion. Black churches in the South successfully campaigned for support across the whole of America. By drawing on religious legitimacy, it was able to shame authorities into living up to American Constitution's principles that all people are born equal. And then the other case study is the New Christian Right, which is a politically and morally conservative Protestant fundamentalist movement. It has gained prominence since the 1960s because of its opposition to the liberalizing of American society. The New Christian Right aims to take America back to God and make abortion, homosexuality, gay marriage, and divorce illegal, reverting to a time before liberalization of American culture and society. The New Christian Right believes strongly in the traditional family and traditional gender roles. It campaigns for the teaching of creationism, the view that the Bible's account of creation is literally true, and to ban sex education in schools. The New Christian Right has made effective use of the media and networking, notably televangelism, where church-owned television stations raise funds and broadcasting programs aimed at making converts and recruiting new members. Right-wing Christian pressure groups have also become the focus for political campaigning and for strengthening links with the Republican Party. An example of this, especially with social media these days, would be, of course, Charlie Kirk. For those who don't know, he was essentially like a podcaster that he used his platform to spread not only his right-wing ideas but also closely with his Christian values, and overall he was just trying to promote that ideology essentially. And then this is the AO3s. Comparison with the civil rights movement are interesting. They suggest that to achieve success, the beliefs and demands of religiosity motivated protest movements and pressure groups need to be consistent with those of wider society. They need to connect with mainstream beliefs about democracy, equality, and religious freedom, which the civil rights movement did, but the New Christian Right has failed to do. Marxism recognizes that ideas, including religious ideas, can have relative autonomy. That is, they can be partly independent of the economic base of society. As a result, religion can have a dual character and can sometimes be a force for change as well as stability. For example, Marx himself does not see religion in entirely negative terms, describing it as the soul of the soulless condition and the heart of the heartless world. He sees religion as capable of humanizing a world made inhumane by exploitation, even if the comfort is illusionary. The idea that religion has a dual character is taken up by Engels. Engels argues that although religion inhibits change by discussing inequality, it can also challenge the status quo and encourage social change. For example, religion sometimes preaches liberation from slavery and misery. Also, although senior clergy usually support the status quo, lower ranks within the church hierarchy have often supported or even inspired an organised popular protest. Ernest Bloch also sees religion as having a dual character. He argues for a view of religion that recognises both its positive and negative influence on social change. As a Marxist, he accepts that religion often inhibits change, but he emphasises that it can also inspire protest and rebellion. For Bloch, religion is an expression of the principles of hope, our dreams of a better life that contains images of a utopia. Images of utopia can sometimes deceive people with promises of rewards in heaven, as Marx himself describes. However, they may also help people see what needs to be changed in this world. Religious beliefs may therefore create a vision of a better world, which, if combined with effective political organisation and leadership, can bring about social change. Liberation theology is a movement that emerged with the Catholic Church in Latin America at the end of the 1960s, with a strong commitment to the poor and opposition to military dictatorship at the time. Liberation theology was a major change of direction for the Catholic Church in Latin America. For centuries, it had been an extremely conservative institution encouraging a fatalistic acceptance of poverty and supporting wealthy elites and military dictatorship. The factors that led to liberation theology were deepening rural poverty and the growth of urban slums throughout Latin America, human rights abuses following military takeovers such as torturing death squads, murdering political opponents, for example in Argentina, Brazil, and Chile, and the growing commitment among Catholic priests to an ideology that supported the poor and oppressed violations of human rights. Unlike traditional Catholicism, liberation theology set out to change society. For example, priests helped the poor to establish support groups called base communities and helped workers and peasants to fight oppression under the protection of the church. Priests took the lead in developing literacy programs, educating the poor about their situations, raising awareness, and mobilizing support. In the 1970s, many Latin American priests supported the oppressed against military dictatorship. However, in the 1980s, Pope John Paul II condemned liberation theology for being too close to Marxism and told priests to focus on pastoral work, not political activism. Since then, the movement declined, but Casanova argued it helped resist state terror and contribute to democratization. The success of liberation theology has led some neo-Marxists to question the view that religion is always a conservative force. Maduro and Lowry see liberation theology as evidence that religion can be a revolutionary force that challenges inequality, aligning with the working class and supports social justice. Religious beliefs can motivate political action, especially when clergy interpret serving the poor as Christian duty. Liberation theology backs neo-Marxist claims. This challenges the traditional Marxist idea that religion always legitimates ruling class power. However, its impact was limited because it did not challenge capitalism itself, and the church later suppressed its radical elements, suggesting its revolutionary potential was temporary and institutionally constrained. In recent decades, liberation theology has faced competition from Pentecostal churches, which have made big in Latin America among the poor. In contrast to two, liberation theology offers an option for the poor of community consciousness raising and campaigning for social change, led by revolutionary priests and nuns in their jeans and sandals, whereas Pentecostalism offers an option for the poor for individuals to pull themselves out of poverty through their own efforts, supported by a congregation and led by church pastors, uniformly respectable in their suits, white shirts, and black ties. Thus, liberation theology offers a radical solution to poverty, collective improvement through political action in the public sphere, while Pentecostalists' solution is conservative, individual self-improvement for the private sphere of family and church. Millenarian movements take their name from the word millennium. In Christian theology, this refers to the idea that Christ would come into the world for a second time and rule for 1,000 years before the day of judgment and the end of the world. According to Wolsey, such movements expect the total and imminent transformation of this world by supernatural means. This will create a heaven on earth, a life free from pain, death, sin, corruption, and imperfection. The transformation will be collective. The group will be saved, not just as individuals. The appeal of millenarian movements is largely to the poor because they promise immediate improvement and they often arise in colonial situations. European colonialism led to economic exploitation and cultural and religious domination, for example, through the Christian missionaries and their schools. At the same time, it shattered the traditional tribal social structures and cultures of the colonized people. Local leaders and local gods lose power and credibility when their people are forced to work for colonists who live in luxury. Worsley studied the millenarian movements in Melanesia known as cargo cults. The islanders felt wrongfully deprived when cargo arrived in the islands for the colonists. A series of cargo cults sprang during the 19th and 20th centuries, asserting that the cargo was meant for the islanders but had been diverted by the colonists for themselves, and that this unjust social order was about to be overturned. These movements often led to widespread unrest that threatened colonial rule. Worsley noticed that the movements combined elements of traditional beliefs with elements of Christianity, such as ideas about heaven, where the suffering of righteous will be rewarded. He described the movements as pre-political. They used religious ideas and images, but they united indigenous populations in mass movements that spanned tribal divisions. Many of the secular nationalist leaders and parties that were to overthrow colonial rule in the 1950s and 60s developed out of millenarian movements. Similarly, from a Marxist perspective, Engels argues that they represent the first awakening of the proletarian self-consciousness. Gramsci is interested in hegemony. By this, Gramsci means how the ruling class have ideologically dominated and or leadership over society using ideas such as religion. For example, writing in Italy in the 1920s and 30s, Gramsci notes the immense conservative ideological power of the Catholic Church in helping to win support for Mussolini's fascist regime. However, hegemony is never guaranteed. It was always possible for the working class to develop an alternative vision of how society should be organised, a counter-hegemony. Like Engels, Gramsci sees religion as having a dual character. It can challenge as well as support the ruling class. He argues that popular forms of religion can help workers see through the ruling class hegemony by offering a vision of a better, fairer world. Similarly, some clergy may act as organic individuals, that is, as educators, organisers, and leaders. They can help workers see the situation they are in and support working class organisations such as trade unions. Billings applies Gramsci's ideas in a case study comparing class struggle in two communities, one of coal miners, the other of textile workers. In Kentucky during the 1920s and 30s, both were working class evangelical Protestants, but the miners were much more militant, struggling for recognition of their union and better conditions, while the textile workers accepted the status quo. Billings argued that the differences in levels of militancy can be understood in terms of hegemony and the role of the religion. Billings identified three ways in which religion either supported or challenged the employer's hegemony. Leadership. The miners benefited from the leadership of organic intellectuals, many of them lay preachers who were themselves miners and trade union activists. These clergy helped to convert miners to the union cause. Textile workers, however, lacked such leadership. Organizations. The miners were able to use independent churches to hold meetings and organize, whereas the textile workers lacked such spaces. Support. The churches kept miners' morale high with supportive sermons, prayer meetings, and group singing. By contrast, textile workers who engaged in union activity met with opposition from local church leaders. Billings concludes that religion can play a prominent opposition role. His study shows that the same religion can be called upon either to defend the status quo or to justify the struggle to change it. We are now on our third topic, which is secularisation. Now, I don't think we're doing bad for time because those two previous topics were like quite chunky compared to the rest of them. But yeah, let's keep going. Based on evidence from the 1851 Consensus of Religious Worship, Crockett estimates that in that year 40% or more of the adult population of Britain attended church on Sundays. This is a much higher figure than today, and it is due to some major changes in religion in the UK since then. For example, a decline in the proportion of the population going to church or belonging to one, an increase in the average age of churchgoers, fewer baptisms and church weddings, a decline in the number holding traditional Christian beliefs, greater diversity, including more non-Christian religions. Wilson argued that Western societies had been undergoing a long-term process of secularisation. He defined secularisation as a process whereby religious beliefs, practices, and institutions lose their social significance. For example, church attendance in England and Wales had fallen to 10 to 15% by the 1960s. Church weddings, baptisms, and Sunday school attendance had also declined, leading Wilson to conclude that Britain has become a secular society. By 2020, about 4% of the adult population attended church on Sundays. Church-going in Britain has therefore more than halved since Wilson's research in the 1960s. For example, Sunday attendance in the Church of England fell from 1.6 million in 1960 to under 0.7 million in 2020, which is currently declining further. Similarly, church weddings and baptisms have a downwards trend. In 1971, 59% of weddings were in church, but by 2018 the proportion was only 20%. The number of weddings in Catholic churches fell by 3/4 between 1965 and 2011. The number of Catholic baptisms today is under half of those in 1964. The rise of Boca's baptisms. While infant baptisms have declined, those of older children have increased in recent years. However, research indicates that this is because many faith schools, which tend to have high performing schools, will only take baptized children. Baptism thus becomes an entry ticket to a good school, rather than a sign of Christian commitment. A person's religious affiliations refers to their membership of or identification with a religion. The evidence indicates a continuing decline in the number of people who are affiliated to a religion. For example, between 1983 and 2018, the proportion of adults with no religion rose from under a third to just over half. In the same period, those identifying as Christian fell by 40%. The fall was the sharpest for Anglicans, Church of England, who declined by almost three-quarters. The number of Catholics increased slightly due to Eastern European immigration. Those belonging to a non-Christian religion, mainly Islam, also increased, partly due to immigration and high birth rates. Other Christians include denominations such as Methodists. This category has remained static since 1983 at 17% of the population. Evidence about religious beliefs from 80 years of survey research shows that religious belief is declining along with decline in church attendance and membership. For example, surveys show a significant decline in belief in a personal God, in Jesus as the Son of God, and in Christian teachings about the afterlife and the Bible. Religious institutions today. The influence of religion as a social institution has also declined. Despite the church having some influence on public life, for example, 26 Church of England bishops sit in the House of Lords, influencing on lawmaking. This has declined significantly since the 19th century. Religion has increasingly been confined to the private sphere of the individual and the family. Bruce agrees with Wilson, concluding that whether we measure church membership, church attendance, the popularity of religious ceremonies to mark rites of passage, or religious belief, we find that there is a steady and unremitting decline. Sociologists have developed a variety of theories and concepts to explain the process of secularisation. A common theme is modernisation, involving the decline of traditional and its replacement with rational and scientific ways of thinking that tend to undermine religion. Secularisation theory also emphasises the effect of social change on religion. Right, at this point, guys, I couldn't think of pictures. I just thought of science, and all I could think of was this meme, so that's a little gem for you if you've made it this far. For example, industrialization leads to the breakup of a small community that were held together by common religious beliefs. A major theme in explanations of secularization is the growth of social and religious diversity. Not only are people increasingly diverse in terms of their occupational and cultural background, but religious institutions are more varied. Secularization theorists argue that the growth of diversity has undermined both the authority of religious institutions and the credibility of religious beliefs. As a result of these changes, religious practice, such as church-going, has also declined. In relation to secularization, rationalization refers to the process by which rational ways of thinking and acting come to replace religious ones. Many sociologists have argued that Western society has undergone a process of rationalization in the last few centuries. The most important of these is Max Weber. He argued that the Protestant Reformation, begun by Martin Luther in the 16th century, started a process of rationalization of life in the West. This process undermined the religious worldview of the Middle Ages and replaced it with a rational scientific outlook found in modern society. For Weber, the medieval Catholic worldview that dominated Europe saw the world as an enchanted or magical garden. God and other spiritual beings and forces, such as angels, the devil, and so on, were believed to be present and active in this world, changing the course of events through their supernatural powers and miraculous interventions in it. Humans could try to influence these beings and forces by magical means such as prayer and spells, fasts and pilgrimages, the wearing of charms, etc., in order to ensure a good harvest, protect against disease, and so on. The Protestant Reformation introduced a worldview in which God was transcendent and no longer intervened in daily life, so the world was seen as running on natural laws. This shift encouraged people to explain events through reason and science rather than supernatural forces, making religious explanations less necessary and ending the idea of an enchanted world. For Weber, this marks the start of the disenchantment and the wider process of rationalization, which allowed science and technology to develop and gave humans greater control over nature, further undermining the religious worldview. Bruce argues that a technological worldview has replaced most religious or supernatural explanations. For example, after a plane crash, we look for mechanical or human errors, not the actions of evil spirits. This leaves little space for religion in everyday life except in areas where technology is less effective, such as incurable illness. Bruce concludes that while science doesn't directly attack religion, it reduces the need for religious explanations, leading people to take religion less seriously. Parsons argues that structural differentiation occurs as societies industrialize, with specialized institutions taking over functions once performed by religion. As a result, religion, which dominated pre industrial society, becomes a smaller and more specialized institution in modern society. Disengagement of religion. Its functions are transferred to other institutions such as the state, and it becomes disconnected from wider society. For example, the church loses the influence it once had on education, social welfare, and the law. Privatization. Bruce argues that religion has become privatized, confined to the private sphere of the home and the family. Religious beliefs are now largely a matter of personal choice. As a result, traditional rituals and symbols have lost meaning. Even where religion continues to perform functions such as education or social welfare, it must conform to the requirements of the secular state. For example, teachers in faith must hold qualifications that are recognised by the state. At the same time, church and state tend to become separated in modern society. Modern states increasingly accept that religion is a personal choice and therefore that the state should not be identified with one particular faith. Decline of community. Wilson argues that industrialization weakened local communities. In pre industrial societies, shared religious rituals expressed common values and integrated people. But once these stable communities broke up, religion lost its social base and its influence over individuals. Industrialization. Small close knit rural communities give way to large loose knit urban communities with diverse beliefs and values. Social and geographical mobility not only breaks up communities but brings people together from many different backgrounds, creating even more diversity. Diversity of occupations, cultures, and lifestyle undermines religion. People are aware that many others believe differently. Bruce argues this undermines the plausibility of religion, as alternative views weaken its credibility. Individualism also reduces plausibility because religion depends on practice in community. Without a strong everyday religious community, both belief and practice tend to decline. The view that the decline of community causes the decline of religion has been criticised. Aldridge points out that a community does not have to be in a particular area. Religion can be a sort of identity on a worldwide scale. This is true of Jewish, Hindu, and Muslim communities. For example, some religious communities are imagined communities that interact through the use of global media. Pentecostal and other religious groups often flourish in supposedly impersonal urban areas. Berger argues that religious diversity causes secularization. In the Middle Ages, the Catholic Church held a monopoly over belief, creating a single sacred canopy that everyone accepted as truth. The Protestant Reformation broke this monopoly, producing many competing churches as interpretations. Modern society is now marked by a plurality of life worlds, where different groups hold different truths. Religious diversity weakens the authority of any single church and reduces the believability of religious claims. As people encounter multiple competing worldviews, traditional religion loses its taken for granted status. Berger has changed his views and now argues that diversity and choice actually stimulate interest and participation in religion. For example, the growth of evangelicalism in Latin America and the new Christian right in the USA point to the continuing vitality of religion, not its decline. Beckford argues with the idea that religious diversity will lead some to question or even abandon their religious beliefs. But this is not inevitable. Opposing views can have this effect of strengthening religious groups' commitment to its existing belief rather than undermining them. Bruce identifies two counter-trends that seem to go against secularization theory. Both are associated with higher than average levels of religious participation. Cultural defense is where religion provides a focal point for the defense of national, ethnic, local, or group identities in a struggle against an external force such as hostile foreign power. Examples include the popularity of Catholicism in Poland before the fall of communism, the resurgence of Islam before the revolution in Iran in 1979. Cultural tradition is where religion provides support and a sense of community for ethnic groups such as migrants to a different country and culture. Herberg describes this in his study of religion and immigration to the USA. Religion has performed similar functions for Irish, African Caribbean, Muslim, Hindu, and other migrants to the UK. However, Bruce argues that religion survives in such situations only because it is a focus for group identity. Therefore, these examples do not disprove secularization, but show that religion is most likely to survive where it performs functions other than relating individuals to the supernatural. For example, church-going declined in Poland after the fall of communism. There is evidence that religion loses importance for migrants once they are integrated into their new society. Again, I'll let you have a look through the AO3s, the criticisms of secularization theory. Okay, so now we are moving on to topic number 4, which is religion, renewal, and choice. And in terms of slides, we've just reached over halfway, so not bad for time, guys. Some sociologists argue that new forms of religion are emerging, often due to changes in wider society such as greater individualism, choice, and consumerism. Davey argues that in today's late modern society, we are seeing a change in religion, away from obligation and towards consumption or choice. In the past, churches such as the Church of England and the Catholic Church would oblige people to go to church, to believe certain things, and to behave in certain ways. This is no longer the case. Religion is no longer inherited or imposed, but a matter of personal choice. I go to church because I want to. I will continue my attachment so long as it provides what I want. But I have no obligation either to attend in the first place or continue if I don't want to. For example, in England and Church, infant baptism was once seen as an obligatory rite of passage, but now only a minority of babies are baptised. In 2019, the Church of England baptised just 8% of newborn babies, compared to 72% in 1927. Davey argues that religion is not declining but simply taking a different, more privatised form. People are increasingly reluctant to belong to organisations, whether these are churches, political parties, or trade unions. But despite this, people still hold religious beliefs, a situation that Davey calls believing without belonging. Davey argued that modern societies show vicarious religion, where an active minority, clergy and regular churchgoers, practice religion on behalf of a much larger population. Even with low attendance, many people in Britain and Northern Europe still identify with the church and rely on this minority to maintain religious life for them. In Europe, the major national churches act as a spiritual health service, like the NHS, that is there for everyone to use whether they need it. This includes using the church for rites of passage such as baptisms, weddings, funerals, as well as major national occasions like the public mourning over the death of Princess Diana in 1997. This supports her ideas of believing without belonging. Davey also rejects the idea that modernization affects all societies the same way, arguing that multiple modernities, for example, Britain has low attendance but continued belief, while the USA combines modernity with high participation. This helps explain why religion appears weak in attendance figures, but still plays a cultural and emotional role in European societies, especially during key life events or national crises. Davey challenges secularization theory by showing that decline in attendance does not necessarily mean decline in belief. However, critics argue that identifying with a church during rituals does not provide strong or meaningful religious commitment. Voser and Crockett do not accept Davey's claim that there is more believing than belonging. Evidence from 5,750 respondents show that both church attendance and belief in God are declining together. If Davey were right, we would expect to see higher levels of belief. Bruce adds that if people are not willing to invest time in going to church, this just reflects the declining strength of their beliefs. When people no longer believe, they no longer wish to belong, and so their involvement in religion diminishes. 2011 census results show that 63% of people identified themselves as Christian, which supports the believing without belonging view. However, Day found that very few of the Christians she interviewed mentioned God or Christianity. Their reason for describing themselves as Christian was not religious, but simply a way of saying they belonged to a white English ethnic group. As Day puts it, they believe in belonging, describing themselves as Christian, was actually a non-religious marker of their ethnic or national identity. Modern society shows a decline in religious obligation and a rise in personal choice. She links this to cultural amnesia, where religion is no longer passed down through families. leaving young people without a fixed religious identity. Despite the church losing its authority and traditional religion declining, religion does not disappear. Instead, people become spiritual shoppers, creating individualized do it yourself belief systems. From this, two new religious types emerge: pilgrims who pursue personal spiritual journeys, and converts who join groups offering strong belonging. Her ideas explain why institutional religion appears weak in Europe while personalized spirituality continues to grow. Her concept of spiritual shopping fits real world patterns such as the rise of New Age practices, online spiritual communities, and the appeal of evangelical or ethnic minority churches that offer belonging. Her argument is that religion adapts to late modern individualism rather than simply disappearing. However, critics argue that highly individualized religion may lack social influence because it does not create strong communities or shared norms. Others suggest she overstates the decline of tradition, since many religious groups still successfully transmit beliefs across generations. Lyon agrees with Davy that believing without belonging is increasingly popular. He argues that traditional religion has given way to a variety of new religious forms that demonstrate its continuing vigour. As a postmodernist, he explains that this in terms of a shift in recent decades from modern to postmodern society. In Lyon's view, postmodern society has a number of features that are changing the nature of religion. Globalization of ideas and beliefs across national boundaries is due to the vital role played by the media and information technology, which saturates us with images and messages from around the globe, compressing time and space to give us instantaneous access to the ideas and belief of previous remote places and religions. Religious ideas have become disembedded. The media lift them out of physical churches and move them to different place and time. For example, the electronic church and televangelism disembody religion from real local churches and relocate it on the internet, allowing believers to express their faith without physically attending church. As a result, religion becomes deinstitutionalized. Moved from their original location, the church, religious ideas become a cultural resource that individuals can adapt for their own purpose. The internet creates a range of opportunities for religious organizations and individuals to exploit. Helen distinguishes between two kinds of internet activity, which she calls religion online and online religion. Religion online is a form of top down communication where a religious organization uses the internet to address members and potential converts. There is no feedback or dialogue between the parties. This is an electronic version of the traditional hierarchical communication of churches to their members, communicating only the officially approved ideas. Online religion is a form of cyber religion that may have no existence outside the internet. It is a many to many form of communication that allows individuals to create non hierarchical relationships and a sense of community where they can visit virtual worships or meditation spaces, explore shared spiritual interests, and provide mutual support. The pagan study by Cowan gained a sense of self worth from feeling that they belong to a global network. However, while postmodernists see online religion as a radical view, new alternative that may be replacing religion, evidence from Hoover et al. Shows that for most users, it's just a supplement to their church-based activities rather than a substitute for them. Now, this next part I'm going to say, it might not make sense, but it was just something that I thought while I was reading this. So, by this definition of online religion, could online fandoms be considered a religion, with celebrities being like almost a godlike figure, and forums such as like Twitter or Reddit or Discord where people create like their own communities, could that not be classed as virtually worshipping their thing? And an example of this, obviously this was before social media, but it was when John Lennon from the Beatles controversially said, "We are more popular than Jesus now." But technically, could he be wrong with that statement? Are young people not more immersed in these like online celebrity cultures than they are worshipping a god? I don't know, it's just a little thought to put in your head. Postmodern society also involves the growth of consumerism, and especially the idea that we now construct our identities through what we choose to consume. Following ideas of spiritual shopping, we no longer have to sign up to any specific religious tradition. Instead, We can pick and mix elements of traditional faiths to suit our tastes and make them part of our identity until something more fashionable or attractive comes along. Similarly, in Lyon's view, religion has relocated to the sphere of consumption. While people may have ceased to belong to religious organisations, they have abandoned religion. Instead, they have become religious consumers, making conscious choices about which elements of religion they find useful. For example, the American Christian fundamentalists in Ammerman's study made use of a number of churches without giving strong loyalty to any of them. One family attended services at a Methodist church and bereavement counselling at a Baptist church, while taking their children to another church for daycare. Having a variety of religious products to choose from results in a loss of faith in meta-narratives. As Berger notes, this weakens traditional religion, claims of a monopoly of truth. This is because exposure to many competing versions of the truth makes people skeptical that any of them are truthful. However, postmodernists such as Lyon argue that the decline of traditional churches does not spell the end of religion. In their place, he argues, many new religious movements are now springing up that the religious consumer can sample from and which they can construct their own personal belief system. New Age spirituality rejects the idea of obligation and obedience to external authority found in traditional religions. Instead, it emphasizes the idea of life as a journey of discovery, personal development, autonomy, and connecting with one's inner self. The key idea linking all these features is individualism. For example, New Age beliefs and practices have been called self-spirituality or self-religion. Lyon argues that we are now in a period of reenchantment with the growth of unconventional beliefs, practices, and spirituality. Although traditional forms of religion have declined, especially in Europe, Lyon points to the growing vitality of non-traditional religion in the West and its resurgence elsewhere in the world. Some sociologists argue that a spiritual revolution has taken place today, in which traditional Christianity has given way to holistic spirituality or New Age spiritual beliefs focused on personal growth. Increased interest in spirituality can be seen in the growth of spiritual market, with an explosion in the number of books about self-help and spirituality, and many practitioners who offer consultations, courses, and therapies ranging from meditation to crystal hearing. In Heelis and Woodhead's study of Kendal and Cumbria, they investigate whether traditional religion has declined and, if so, how far the growth of the spirituality is compensating for this. They distinguish between two groups: the congregational domain of traditional evangelical Christianity, the holistic milieu of spirituality, and the New Age. They found that in 2000, in a typical week, 7.9% of the population attended church and 1.6% took part in activities of the holistic milieu. New Age spirituality has grown because of a massive subjective turn in today's culture. As a result, traditional religions are declining. Heelis and Woodhead put it, religion that tells us what to believe in and how to behave is out of tune with culture, which believes it is up to us to seek out answers for ourselves. However, critics argue that the holistic milieu remains numerically small and may not compensate for the large-scale decline of institutional religion. Others suggest that subjective spirituality may lack the community and social influence that traditional religion once provided. And again, here's the AO3s for you to look through. The main advocates of religious market theory, also known as rational choice theory, are Stark and Bainbridge. They are very critical of secularisation theory, which they see as Eurocentric. Instead, Stark and Bainbridge propose religious market theory. This theory is based on two assumptions. People are naturally religious and religion meets human needs, therefore the overall demand for religion remains constant, even though the demand for particular types of religion may vary. It is human nature to seek rewards and avoid costs. When people make choices, they weigh up the costs and benefits of the different options available. When real rewards are scarce and unobtainable, religion compensates by promising supernatural roles. For example, immortality is unobtainable, but religion compensates by promising life after death. The cycle of renewal. As an alternative to secularisation theory, Stark and Bainbridge put forward the concept of a cycle of religious decline, revival, and renewal. They describe a perpetual cycle throughout history, with some religious declining and others growing and attracting new members. For example, when established churches decline, they leave a gap in the market for sects and cults to attract new followers. Religious competition. According to Stark and Bainbridge, churches operate like companies selling goods in a market. They argue that competition leads to improvement in the quality of the religious goods on offer. The churches that make their products attractive will succeed in attracting more customers. Meanwhile, churches that are not responsive to the needs of their members will decline. The demand for religion increases where there are different sorts to choose from because consumers can find one that meets their needs. By contrast, where there is a religious monopoly, it leads to decline. This is because without competition, a church has no incentive to provide people with what they want. Stark and Brimage believe that religion thrives in the USA because there has never been a religious monopoly there. The Constitution guarantees freedom of religion and the separation of church and state, and there has always been a wide variety of denominations to choose from. This encourages the growth of a healthy religious market where religions grow or decline according to consumer demand. The situation in Europe is entirely different. Most European countries have dominated by an official state church, which has a religious monopoly, such as the Church of England. Competition has been held back and the lack of choice has led to decline. Supply, not demand. Stark and Brimage conclude that the main factor influencing the level of religious participation is not the demand for religion, but the supply. Participation increases where there is an ample supply of religious groups to choose from, but declines when supply is restricted. Also, based on the comparison of America and Europe, Stark and Bainbridge argue that the decline of religion is not a universal trend happening in all societies, as some versions of secularisation theory suggest. And then here are the criticisms of religious market theory. Norris and Inglehart reject religious market theory on the grounds that it only applies to America and fails to explain the variations in religiosity between different societies. For example, international studies of religion have found no evidence of the link between religious choice and religious participation that Stark and Bainbridge claim exists. Norris and Inglehart argue that the reason for variation in religiosity between societies is because of different degrees of existential security. By this, they mean the feelings that survival is secure enough that it can be taken for granted. Religion meets a need for security, and therefore, societies where people already feel secure have a low level demand for religion. Poor societies where people face life threatening risks such as famine, disease, and environmental disaster have high levels of insecurity and thus high levels of religiosity. Poor people who live in rich societies also face greater insecurity and therefore more religious than rich people in those societies. Rich societies where people have high standard of living are at less risk, have a greater sense of security and thus lower levels of religiosity. However, Norris and Inglehart note that the global population growth undermines the trend towards secularisation. Rich, secular Western countries have low levels of population growth, where poor, insecure religious countries have high rates. As a result, while rich countries are becoming more secular, the majority of the world is becoming more religious. In Western Europe, the trend is towards increasing secularisation. Norris and Inglehart argue that this is not surprising because these societies are among the most equal and secure in the world, with well-developed welfare states offering comprehensive healthcare, social services, and pensions. This reduces poverty and protects those at the bottom from insecurity. By comparison with Europe, the United States remains much more religious. Norris and Inglehart argue this is because America is almost the most unequal of the rich societies, with an inadequate health, welfare safety net and individualistic dog-eat-dog values. This creates high levels of poverty and insecurity, which creates a greater need for religion. Therefore, although America is more religious than Europe, this is explained by Norris and Inglehart's general theory of religiosity as a result of insecurity. For example, they point out that although America is religious by standards of other rich nations, it is less religious than poor ones. Gill and Lungard further argue that the more a country spends on welfare, the lower the level of religious participation. Thus, European countries which spend more than the USA are more secular than the USA. They know that in the past religion used to provide welfare for the poor and still does so in poorer countries. However, from the 20th century, the state in the West began to provide welfare, and this contributed to religion's decline. Nevertheless, Gill and Lundgaard do not expect religion to disappear completely, because although welfare provisions meet the need for security, it does not answer ultimate questions about the meaning of life, unlike religion. Therefore, although the availability of welfare reduces the need for religion, it does not eliminate that need completely. We are now on topic 5, which is religion in a global context. Fundamentalists look back at the Golden Age and seek a return to the core basics of their faith. However, fundamentalist is different from traditional religion. It emerges when traditional beliefs feel threatened by modern society or globalization. These threats may come from outside or from within. And us and their mentality, fundamentalists separate themselves from the rest of the world and refuse to compromise with it. As Davy puts it, they seek to establish islands of certainty against what they see as social and cultural chaos. Conspiracy theories. Fundamentalists are often attracted to conspiracy theories. According to Aldridge, some extreme Christian and Islamic fundamentalists hold anti Semitic conspiracy theories that believe Jews are conspiring to secure world domination. Patriarchy. Hawley notes that fundamentalists favour a world in which control over women's sexuality, reproductive powers, and their social and economic roles is fixed for all time by divine decree. Use of modern technology. Although fundamentalists oppose modern culture, which they see as corrupt by secularism, liberalism, materialism, permissiveness, promiscuity, they are keen to use modern technology to achieve their aims, from computers and the internet to televangelism and military weaponry. An authoritative sacred text. For Christian fundamentalists, every word of the Bible is true. Its truths are valid for all eternity and has answers to all life's important questions. The texts are inerrant and are not open to questioning. However, as Aldred notes, no text speaks for itself, it must be interpreted. So what fundamentalists hold to be true is not the text itself, but the interpretation of its meaning. As Davy argues, fundamentalism occurs where those who hold traditional orthodox beliefs and values are threatened by modernity and feel the need to defend themselves against it. In this sense, fundamentalists are themselves products of modernity, insofar as they are born out of the clash between modernity and traditional cultures. Similarly, Giddens argues that fundamentalism is a product and a reaction to globalization, which undermines traditional social norms concerning the nuclear family, gender, and sexuality. In today's late modern society, individuals are constantly faced with choice, uncertainty, and risk. The attraction of fundamentalism and its rigid dogmatic beliefs is the certainty that it promises in an uncertain world. It is a retreat into faith-based answers and away from the risk and uncertainties of a globalizing world. Giddens identifies fundamentalist versions of several major religions, including Islam, Christianity, and Hinduism. Giddens contrasts fundamentalism with cosmopolitanism. Cosmopolitanism is tolerant of the views of others and open to new ideas, constantly reflecting on and modifying beliefs in the light of new information, which Giddens calls reflexive thinking. It requires people to justify their views using rational arguments and evidence rather than appealing to sacred text. Cosmopolitan religion and spirituality emphasize the pursuit of personal meaning and self-improvement rather than submission to authority. Bauman sees fundamentalism as a response to living in postmodernity. Postmodern society brings freedom of choice, uncertainty, and a heightened risk awareness, undermining the old certainties about how to live that were grounded in tradition. In this situation, while some embrace a new freedom, others are attracted to fundamentalism by its claims of absolute truth and certainty. Similarly, Castells distinguishes between two responses to postmodernity: resistance identity, a defensive reaction of those who feel threatened and retreat into fundamentalist communities, and project identity, the response of those who are forward-looking and engage with social movements such as feminism and environmentalism. And again, here are the AO3s. I don't know what happened to the editing there, whoops. Like Giddens, Bruce sees the main cause of fundamentalism as the perceptions of religious traditionalists that today's globalizing world threatens their beliefs. However, Bruce regards fundamentalism as being confined to monotheistic religions. Polytheistic religions that believe in the existence of many gods, such as Hinduism, are unlikely to produce fundamentalism. This is because monotheistic religions are based on the notion of God's will as revealed through a single authoritative sacred text, such as the Quran or the Bible. This is believed to contain the actual word of God, and it lays down specific rules for believers to follow. By contrast, polytheistic religions lack a single all-powerful deity and a single authoritative text, so there is much more scope for different interpretations and no absolute truth. Bruce argues while all fundamentalists share the same characteristics, different fundamentalist movements may have different origins. Some are triggered by changes within own societies, while others are a response to changes being thrust upon a society from the outside. Bruce illustrates this distinction with the examples of Christian and Islamic fundamentalisms. In the West, fundamentalism is the most often a reaction to change taking place within a society, especially trends toward diversity and choice, for example, the New Christian Right in America. In developing countries, fundamentalism is usually a reaction to changes being thrust upon a society from outside, as in the case of the Islamic Revolution in Iran. However, Davy argues that the recent decades has seen the emergence of secular forms of fundamentalism. She links this change is in the nature of modern society. She distinguishes between two phases of modernity. The first phase gives rise to religious fundamentalism. This phase stretched from the Enlightenment in the late 18th century to about the 1960s. The Enlightenment philosophy held an optimistic secular belief in certainty of progress based on the power of science and human reason to improve the world. This Enlightenment project helped to secularize all areas of social life, attacking and undermining religious certainties. The second phase is giving rise to secular fundamentalism. Since the 1970s, the optimism of the Enlightenment project has itself come under attack. This is the result of a growing mood of pessimism and uncertainty. This mood is the product of the insecurity caused by changes such as globalization, concerns about the environment, and the collapse of communism in 1989. This has led to a loss of faith in the major secular Enlightenment ideologies such as liberalism and rationalism in Western Europe, and Marxism in Eastern Europe, whose claim to truth and belief in progress has been undermined. As a result, these secular ideologies are themselves struggling for survival, just like traditional religion. As Davy puts it, they are past their sell-by date, and as with religion, when it comes under attack, some supporters of secular ideologies such as nationalism have also been attracted to fundamentalism. For example, the disintegration of communist Yugoslavia in the early 1990s led to secular nationalist fundamentalism that justified the ethnic cleansing of territory to create a clear-cut separation between ethnic groups, between us and them. In Western Europe, perceived religious challenges to liberal secular values provoked a secular fundamentalist reaction. For example, in 2004, France banned pupils from wearing religious symbols in school, and in 2010 made it illegal for women to wear the veil in public. In 2015, some French local councils controlled by right-wing political parties stopped serving alternatives to pork in their school meals, on the grounds that all pupils should be treated equally and that religion must be kept out of the secular public sphere. Ansel sees such trends as a form of cultural racism that uses the apparently liberal language of universal equality and social integration. However, it is also about preserving the dominant group's cultural identity and way of life. It legitimates the exclusion of religious and cultural minorities. Davy argues that both religious and secular movements can become fundamentalist as a result of the greater uncertainties of life in late modern or postmodern world, in which reasserting truth and certainty is increasingly attractive. As a result, competing fundamentalists have become a normal feature of today's society. Similarly, I can't say that, sorry, sees fundamentalists as a form of recreated memories in late modern societies that have suffered cultural amnesia and forgotten their historic religious traditions. In recent years, religion has played an important role in various global conflicts. These include the 9/11 terrorist attacks in the USA in 2001 and the civil war in former Yugoslavia in the 1990s. In several widely criticized articles and books, the American neoconservative writer Samuel Huntington claims that such conflicts are symptoms of a clash of civilization. Huntington identifies 7 civilizations: Western, Islamic, Slavic Orthodox, Latin America, Confucian, Japanese, and Hindu. Most civilizations are larger than a single nation. Each has a shared cultural background and history and is closely identified with one of the world's great religions. Huntington claims that religious differences between civilizations are now a major source of conflict. This is because globalization has made nation states less important as a source of identity, creating a gap that religion has filled. At the same time, globalization increases the contacts between civilizations, increasing the likelihood of conflict. He sees religious differences as harder to resolve than political ones because they are deeply rooted in culture and history. In Huntington's view, religious differences are created a set of hostile us and them relationships, with increased competition between civilizations for economic and military power. For example, in the Middle East, in particular, Huntington sees the West as under threat from Islam. Now we have the A.O. Freeze critiquing the clash of civilization. Huntington's work suggests that the Muslim world holds fundamentally different anti-democratic values from those of the West. However, evidence indicates that this is not the case. Using data from the World Values Survey, Inglehart and Norris conclude that the issue that divides the West and the Muslim world is not democracy, but gender and sexuality. They found that support for democracy is similarly high in both the West and the Muslim world, but there are great differences when it comes to attitudes to divorce, abortion, gender equality, and gay rights. While Western attitudes have become more liberal, in the Muslim world they remain traditional. Inglehart and Norris comment that in the last decade, democracy has become the political ideology to gain global appeal. There is no global agreement about self-expression values, such as tolerance or diversity, gender equality, and freedom of speech. In their view, these divergent values constitute the real clash of civilization between Muslim societies and the West. Bruce sees one function of religion in today's world as cultural defense. This is where religion serves to unite a community against an external threat. In such situations, religion has special significance for its followers because it symbolizes the group or society's collective identity. Defending the community against a threat often gives religion a prominent role in politics. Two examples of religion as cultural defense from the late 20th century are Poland and Iran. They demonstrate how religion can be used in defense of national identity in the face of political domination by external power. From 1945 to 1989, Poland was under communist rule, imposed from the outside by the Soviet Union. During this time, the Catholic Church was suppressed, but for many Poles, it continued to embody Polish national identity. The church served as a popular rallying point for opposition to the Soviet Union and the Polish Communist Party. In particular, it lent its active support to the Solidarity Free Trade Union movement in the 1980s that did much to bring about the fall of communism. Thereafter, the church regained a public role and has had a significant influence on Polish politics since. Western capitalism powers and oil companies had long influence in Iran, including involvement in the illegal overthrow of a democratic government in the 1950s to install a pro-Western regime. In the 1960s and 70s, modernization and westernization was widening the gap between the rich and the poor. The revolution in 1979 brought the creation of the Islamic Republic, in which clerics held state power and they were able to impose Islamic Sharia law. However, Haynes argues that the Iranian Revolution was not typical of the Middle East in that it was led by religious leaders. Globalization has brought rapid economic growth and has seen India become a more important player on the world political stage. It has brought rising prosperity to some, notably India's new middle class. Nanda's book, God and Globalization, examines the role of Hinduism, the religion of 85% of the population, in legitimating both the rise of the new Hindu ultranationalism and the prosperity of the new Indian middle class. Globalization has created a huge and prosperous, scientifically educated urban middle class in India, working in IT, pharmaceuticals, and biotechnology sectors closely tied into the global economy. These are precisely the people whom secularization theory predict will be the first to abandon religion in favour of a secular worldview. Yet a vast majority of this class continue to believe in the supernatural. A survey by the Centre of the Study of Developing Societies found that Indians are becoming more religious. Only 5% said their religiosity had declined in the last 5 years, while 30% said they had become more religious. The survey also found that urban educated Indians are more religious than their rural and illiterate counterparts. Increased interest in religion has also been reflected in a dramatic growth of religious tourism, such as visits to shrines and temples. Nanda notes that it is becoming fashionable to be religious and to be seen to do so. Another feature of this middle-class religiosity is that they are attracted to what were once low-status village gods and goddesses worshipped by the poor. This is because these deities are seen as becoming more responsive to people's needs than traditional Hindu great gods. Nanda argues that their growing religiosity is due to ambivalence about their wealth. This ambivalence arises from the conflict between traditional Hindu renunciation and materialism and their new prosperity. Modern holy men and telegurus resolve this by promoting this idea that desire is divine and not bad. They offer business-friendly Hinduism. easing guilt by suggesting that consumerism can be spiritually balanced through rituals, which also display wealth. Thus, modern Hinduism legitimates the middle class's position and helps them adapt to global consumer capitalism. Similarly, Berger argues that Pentecostalism in Latin America acts as a functional equivalent to Weber's Protestant ethic. That is, it encourages the development of capitalism today in the same way Calvinism did in the 16th and 17th century Europe. Latin American Pentecostalists embodied an ethic and lifestyle similar to that of Calvinists. Like Calvinism, Pentecostalism demands an aesthetic way of life that emphasizes personal discipline, hard work, and abstinence from alcohol. In this way, it encourages members to prosper and become upwardly mobile. Berger concludes that Pentecostalism has a strong affinity with modern capitalism. Berger agrees with Weber that an ethic like Protestantism is necessary to promote economic development and raise a society out of poverty. This process can be led by an active minority with an ethic of this worldly aestheticism, such as the Pentecostalists. Thus, in Chile and southern Brazil, there is now growing and prosperous Pentecostalists, middle class leading capitalist development. However, Berger underlies Weber's point that religious ideas alone are not enough to produce economic development. Natural resources are also needed. For example, while Pentecostalism has grown in northern Brazil, the region lacks resources and remains backwards, quote unquote. Contrast the South, which is developing rapidly, has both a work ethic and necessary resources. In the last 5 centuries, Christianity has globalized itself by expanding out of Europe, first into South America and then Africa. Lehman distinguishes between two phases in this expansion. First phase, Christianity, accompanied colonization and was imposed on the indigenous populations by conquest, often forcibly suppressing local religions. Second phase, over the last century or so, it has spread because it gained a popular following from below. For example, by 2020, there were 195 million Pentecostals in South America. Lehman attributes the success of Pentecostalism as a global religion in part to its ability to incorporate local beliefs. Although it preaches a similar message worldwide, it uses imagery and symbolism drawn from local culture and beliefs, especially spirit possession cults. Pentecostalists attack such cults as the work of the devil, but their ministers conduct exorcisms to rid people of evil spirits. By doing so, Pentecostalism validates local traditional beliefs, while at the same time claiming to give believers access to a greater power, that of Christian Holy Spirit. In this way, Pentecostalism creates a new local religious forms. In Africa, this has led to the Africanization of Christianity, rather than the total disappearance of indigenous religions. As a result of this ability to adapt to local customs and establish a local identity for itself, Pentecostalism has also been successful in developing countries because it's able to appeal to the poor who make up the majority of the population, and because it uses global media to spread its message. We're slowly getting there. We are now on our second to last topic, which is organisations, movements, and members. The first attempt to identify the features of different types of religious organisations was by Ernest Troeltsch. He distinguishes between two main types, the church and the sect. Churches are large organisations, often with millions of members, such as the Catholic Church, run by a bureaucratic hierarchy of professional priests, and they claim a monopoly of truth. They are universalistic, aiming to include the whole of society, although they tend to be more attractive to the higher classes because they are ideologically conservative and often closely linked to the state. For example, the British sovereign is head of the state and the Church of England. They place few demands on their members. By contrast, Troeltsch sees sects as small, inclusive groups. Unlike churches, sects are hostile to wider society and they expect a high level of commitment. They draw their members from the poor and oppressed. Many are led by a charismatic leader rather than bureaucratic hierarchy. The only similarity with churches is that sects too believe that they have a monopoly of religious truth. In addition to church and sects, sociologists have identified other types of religious organizations. Nyberg describes denominations such as Methodism as lying midway between churches and sects. Membership is less exclusive than a sect, but they don't appeal to the whole of society like a church. Like churches, they broadly accept society's values but are not linked to the state. They impose some minor restrictions on members, such as forbidden alcohol, but are not as demanding as sects. Both, unlike both church and sect, they are tolerant of other religious organisations and do not claim a monopoly of truth. A fourth type of religious organisation is the cult. This is a highly individualistic, loose-knit and usually small grouping around some shared themes and interests, but usually without a sharply defined and exclusive belief system. Cults are usually led by practitioners or therapists who claim special knowledge, like domination cults, are usually tolerant of other organisations and their beliefs. Cults do not demand strong commitment from followers, who are often more like customers or trainees than members. They may have little further involvement with the cult once they have acquired the belief or techniques it offers. Many cults are world affirming, claiming to improve life in this world. In summing up the similarities and differences between religious organisations, Wallace highlights two characteristics: how they see themselves. Churches and sects claim that interpretation of the faith is the only legitimate or correct one. Denominations and cults accept that there can be many valid interpretations. How they are seen by wider society. Churches and denominations are seen as respectable and legitimate, whereas sects and cults are seen as deviant. Sociologists argue that some of the above descriptions of religious organisations do not fit today's reality. For example, Bruce argues that Trailsh's ideas of a church as having a religious monopoly only applies to the Catholic Church before the 16th century. Protestant Reformation. Since then, sects and cults have flourished, and religious diversity has become the norm. Today, churches are no longer truly churches in Trailsh's sense, because they have lost their monopoly and have been reduced to the status of the denominations competing with all the rest. Since the 1960s, there has been an explosion in the number of new religions and organisations. This has led to new attempts to classify them. Wallace categorises these new religious movements, NRMs, into three groups based on their relationship to the outside world, whether they reject the world, accommodate to it, or affirm it. World rejection NRMs. They vary greatly in size, from a handful of members to hundreds of thousands. They have several characteristics. They are clearly religious organisations with a clear notion of God. They are highly critical of the outside world, and they expect or seek radical change. To achieve salvation, members must make a sharp break with their former life. Members live communally with restricted contact with the outside world. The movement controls all aspects of their lives and is often accused of brainwashing them. They often have conservative moral codes. World accommodating. These are often breakaways from existing mainstream churches or denominations. They neither accept nor reject the world, and they focus on religious rather than worldly matters, seeking to restore the spiritual purity of religion. And world affirming. These groups differ as they may lack some of the conventional features of religion. However, like religions, they offer their followers access to spiritual or supernatural powers. They accept the world as it is and are optimistic, promising followers success in terms of mainstream goals and values. They are non-exclusive and tolerant of other religions, but claim to offer additional specialist knowledge or techniques that enable followers to unlock their own spiritual powers and achieve success or overcoming problems. They have been described as psychologizing religions, offering this worldly gratification. Most are cults, whose followers are often customers rather than members, and entry is through training. And then we have the evaluation of different types of religious organisations. Stark and Brimridge identified two kinds of organisations that are in conflict with wider society. Sects result from schisms, splitting in existing organisations. They break away from churches usually because of disagreements about doctrine. Cults are new religions, such as Scientology and Christian Science, or ones new to that particular society that have been imported. In general, Stark and Brimridge see sects as promising otherworldly benefits, for example, a place in heaven, to those suffering economic deprivation or ethical deprivation. By contrast, cults tend to offer this worldly benefits, for example, good health, to more prosperous individuals who are suffering psychic deprivation and organismic deprivation. Stark and Brimbridge subdivide cults according to how organised they are. Audience cults are the least organised and do not involve formal membership or much commitment. There is little interaction between members, participation may be through the media. Client cults are based on the relationship between a consult and a client and provide services to their followers. In the past, they were often purveyors of medical miracles, contact with the dead, etc., but the emphasis has shifted to therapies promising personal fulfillment and self discovery. Cultic movements are the most organised and demand a higher level of commitment than other cults. The movement aims to meet all of its members' religious needs, and they are rarely allowed to belong to other religious groups at the same time. Some client cults become cultic movements for their most enthusiastic followers. Stark and Brimridge make some useful distinctions between organisations. For example, their idea, like Truelch's distinction between church and sex. However, some of these examples they use do not necessarily neatly fit into any of their categories. Since the 1960s, there has been a rapid growth in the number of sects and cults, and in the number of people belonging to them. For example, there are estimated to be over 800 NRMs and over 500,000 individuals belonging to these and other non-mainstream Christian churches in the UK. Sociologists have offered three main explanations for this trend: marginality, relative deprivation, and social change. As Trilch notes, sects tend to draw their members from the poor and the oppressed. Similarly, according to Verber, sects tend to arise in groups who are marginal to society. Such groups may feel as they are privileged, that is, that they are not receiving their just economic rewards or social status. In Verber's view, sects offer a solution to this problem by offering their members the theodicy of privilege, that is, a religious explanation and justification for their suffering and disadvantage. This may explain their misfortune as a test of faith. Historically, many sects, as well as military movements, have recruited from the marginalized poor. For example, in the 20th century, the Nation of Islam, the Black Muslims, recruited amongst disadvantaged black people in the USA. However, since the 1960s, the sect-like world rejecting NRMs, such as the Moonies, have recruited mainly from affluent groups of often well-educated young middle-class white people. However, Wallace argues that this does not contradict Verber's view, because many of these individuals have become marginal to society. Despite their middle-class origins, most were hippies, dropouts, and drug users. Relative deprivation refers to the subjective sense of being deprived. For example, although middle-class people are materially well off, they may feel they are spiritually deprived, especially in today's materialistic, consumerist world, which they may perceive as impersonal and lacking in moral values, emotional wealth, or authenticity. As a result, Wallace argues they may turn to sex for a sense of community. Similarly, Stark and Brimbridge argued that it is relatively deprived who break away from churches to form sects. When middle class members of a church seek to compromise its beliefs to fit into society, deprived members are likely to break away to form sects that safeguard the original message of the organisation. Stark and Brimbridge argue that world rejecting sects offer to deprive the compensators that they need for the rewards that they are denied in this world. By contrast, the privileged need no compensators or world rejecting religions. They are attracted to world accepting churches that express their status and bring them further success in achieving earthly rewards. Wilson argues that periods of rapid change disrupt and undermine established norms and values, producing anomie or normlessness. In response to the uncertainty and insecurity that this creates, those who are most affected by the distribution may turn to sex as a solution. For example, Bruce sees the growth of sex and cults today as a response to the social changes evolved in modernization and secularization. In Bruce's view, society is now secularized and therefore people are less attracted to the traditional churches and strict sects. World rejecting NRMs, Wallace points to social changes from the 1960s impacting on young people, including the increased time spent in education. This gave them the freedom from adult responsibilities and enabled a counterculture to develop. Also, the growth of radical political movements offered alternative ideas about the future. World-rejecting RRMs were attractive in this context because they offered young people a more idealistic way of life. World-affirming RRMs. Bruce argues that their growth is a response to modernity, especially to the rationalization of work. Work no longer provides meaning or a source of identity, yet at the same time we are expected to achieve, even though we may lack the opportunities to succeed. World-affirming NRMs provide both a sense of identity and techniques that promise success in the world. While churches such as the Catholic Church and the Church of England have a history of stretching over many centuries, sects by contrast are often short-lived organisations, frequently lasting only a single generation or less. Sociologists have therefore been interested to understand the dynamic of sect development. This is also interested in how NRMs developed by Wallace will fare in the longer term. Niebuhr argues that sects are world-rejecting organisations that come into existence because of schisms, splitting from an established church because of disagreement over religious doctrine. Niebuhr argues that sects are short-lived and that within a generation they either die out or they compromise with the world, abandon their extreme ideas and become a denomination. There are several reasons for this. The second generation who are born in the sect lack the commitment of their parents, who had continuously rejected the world and joined voluntarily. The Protestant ethic effect. Sects that practice asceticism, hard work, and saving tend to become prosperous and upwardly mobile. Such members will be tempted to compromise with the world, so they will either leave or it will abandon its world rejecting beliefs. Death of the leader. Sects with a characteristic leader either collapse on the leader's death or a more formal bureaucratic leadership takes over, transforming it into a denomination. Similarly, Stark and Bainbridge see religious organisations moving through a cycle. In the first stage of schism, there is tension between the needs of the deprived and privileged members of the church. Deprived members break away to found a world-rejecting sect. The second stage is one initial fever, where a charismatic leader and great tensions between the sect's belief and those of wider society. In the third stage, denominationalism, the Protestant ethic effect, and the coolness of the second generation means the fever disappears. The fourth stage, establishment, sees the sect become the more world-accepting and tension with wider society reduces. In the final stage, further schism result when more zealous or less privileged members break away to found a new sect true to the original meaning. And then we have the AO3s. The term New Age covers a range of beliefs and activities that have been widespread since at least the 1980s. Healist estimates there are around 2,000 such activities and 146,000 practitioners in the UK. Many of them are very loosely organised audience or client cults. They are extremely diverse and eclectic, putting unconnected ideas together in new combinations. They believe in UFOs and aliens, astrology, tarot, crystals, various forms of alternative medicines, psychotherapy, yoga, meditation, magic, etc. However, according to Healers, there are two common themes that characterize the New Age: self-spirituality. New Agers seeking the spiritual have turned away from traditional external religions, such as churches, and instead look inside themselves to find it. Detraditionalization. The New Age rejects spiritual authority or external traditional sources such as priests or sacred texts. Instead, it values personal experience and believes that we can discover the truth for ourselves and within ourselves. Postmodernity and the New Age. Several explanations for the popularity of the New Age have been offered. For example, Drane argues that it is appeal of a part of its shift towards postmodern society. One of the features of postmodern society is a loss of faith in meta-narratives or claims to have the truth. Science promised to bring progress to a better world, but instead it has given us war, genocide, and environmental destruction. As a result, people have lost faith in experts and in professionals such as scientists and doctors, and they are disillusioned with the church's failure to meet their spiritual needs. As a result, they are turning to New Age ideas. By contrast, Bruce argues that the growth of the New Age is a feature of the latest phase of modern society and not postmodernity. Modern society values individualism, which is also a key principle of New Age beliefs, the idea that individuals have the truth within themselves, and it is also a particularly important value among those in the expressive professions concerned with human potential, such as community workers or artists. the group to whom the New Age appeals most. Bruce notes that the New Age beliefs are often softer versions of Eastern religions, such as Buddhism, that have been watered down to make them palatable to self-centered Westerners. Bruce sees the New Age pick amidst spiritual shopping as typical of religion in late modern society, reflecting consumerist ethos of capitalist society. Similarly, Healer sees the New Age and modernity as linked in four ways: a sources of identity. In modern society, the individual has many different roles, but there is little overlap between them, resulting in a fragmented identity. New Age beliefs often source of authentic identity. Consumer culture creates dissatisfaction because it never delivers the perfection that it promises. The New Age offers an alternative way to achieve perfection. Rapid social change in modern society disrupts established norms and values. The New Age provides a sense of certainty and truth. Decline of organized religion. Modernity leads to secularisation, thereby removing the traditional alternatives to New Age beliefs. For example, in the USA, the New Age is strongest where church-going is at its lowest in California. Davy notes that there are gender differences in terms of religious practice, belief, self-identification, private prayer, and many other aspects of religiosity. For example, most churchgoers are female and they are more likely than men to attend church regularly. Female churchgoers outnumber males by almost 500,000. More women than men say they have a religion. More women than men say religion is important to them, and more women describe themselves as spiritual. Many fewer women than men are atheist or agnostic. Even among atheists, men are nearly twice as likely to say that they do not believe in life after death. In all major faiths in the UK except Sikhs, women are more likely than men to practice their religion, and women express greater interest in religion and have a stronger personal commitment towards it. According to Miller and Hoffman, there are three main reasons for women's higher levels of religiosity. Gender differences and risk taken are a reason for differences in religiosity. By not being religious, people are risking that religion might be right and they will be condemned to hell. As men are less risk adverse than women, they are more likely to take the risk of not being religious. Interestingly, as Davy notes, the virtual disappearance today of the dangers associated with childbirth that women have always faced throughout history means that women in Western societies face fewer risks and may be becoming less religious as a result. Women are more religious because they are socialized to be passive, obedient, and caring. These are qualities valued by most religions, so it follows that women are more likely than men to be attracted to religion. Interestingly, men who have these qualities are more likely to be religious. Women's gender roles mean they are more likely than men to work part-time or to be full-time carers, so they have more time to participate in religious activities. Women are more likely to be attracted to the church as a source of gender identity, and Greeley argues that their role in taking care of other family members increases women's religiosity because it involves responsibility for their ultimate welfare as well as their everyday needs. Similarly, Davy argues that women are closer to birth and death through childbearing and caring for their elderly, sick, and dying relatives, and this brings them closer to the ultimate question about the meaning of life that religion is concerned with. This also fits with differences in the way that men and women see God. Men are more likely to see God as power and control, while women tend to see God of love and forgiveness. Bruce argues that women's religiosity is a result of their lower levels of involvement in paid work. He links this to secularization process such as rationalization. Over the past 2 centuries, this has gradually driven religion out of the male-dominated public sphere of work, confining it to the private sphere of family and personal life, the sphere that women are more concerned with. As religion has become more privatized, so men's religiosity has declined more quickly than women's. However, by the 1960s, many women have also taken a secular and masculinized role in the public sphere of paid work, and this has led to what Brown calls the decline of female piety, where women too were withdrawing from religion. Yet despite the decline, religion remains more attractive to women than men for at least 2 reasons. Religion has a strong affinity with values such as caring for others. Women continue to have a primary role in caring for the young and old, both in the private sphere of the family and in the kind of paid work they do. Men's withdrawal from religion in the last 2 centuries meant that churches became feminized spaces and emphasized women's concerns such as caring and relationships. Woodhead argues that this continues to make religion more attractive to women. The introduction of women priests in the Church of England in 1994 and women bishops in 2015 may have reinforced this. New Age movements often celebrate the natural and involve cults of healing, which gives women a higher status and sense of worth. Bruce argues that women's experience of child rearing makes them more cooperative and caring. In Bruce's view, this fits an expressive emphasis on the New Age. Furthermore, the New Age highlights the importance of being authentic rather than merely acting out roles. Women are more likely to be attracted as they are more likely to perceive their gender roles as restricted. The individual sphere. Women in paired work may experience a role conflict between their masculized instrumental role in the public sphere of work and their traditional expressive feminine role in the private sphere of the family. Woodhead suggests that for these women, New Age beliefs are attractive because they appeal to a third sphere, the individual sphere. This sphere is concerned with individual autonomy and personal growth. New Age beliefs bypass the role conflict by creating a new source of identity for women based on their inner self. Class differences. Bruce highlights class differences in religious preferences amongst women. Middle class women often favour New Age beliefs that emphasise personal authority and self development, while working class women are more drawn to passive roles such as belief in an all powerful God or fatalistic ideas that superstition and horoscopes. These differences align with other class distinctions, such as in education, where middle class women believe in individual control over destiny, contrasting with fatalistic views of the working class. Contemporary Britain is a multi ethnic, multi religious society. Although the biggest religious groups are those describing themselves as Christians, about 63% of the population, there are significant numbers of Muslims, Hindus, and Sikhs, almost all belonging to minority ethnic groups originating in the Indian subcontinent, while many Christians are of Black African or Caribbean origin. In London, Brierley found that Black people are twice as likely to attend church as white people. Muslim, Hindus, and Black Christians are considerably more likely than white Christians to see their religion as important and attend a place of worship every week. However, minority ethnic groups have higher participation rates. Madood found a decline in the importance of religion for all ethnic groups and that few were observant, especially among the second generation. Several reasons have been suggested for ethnic differences in religiosity. One is the idea that most minority ethnic groups originate from poorer countries with traditional cultures, both of which produce higher levels of religious belief and practice. On arrival in the UK, they and their children maintain the pattern they brought with them from their country of origin. However, this disregards the impact of their experiences as immigrants and as minorities in a new society, and how this may give religion a new role as cultural defence and cultural transition. Bruce argues that religion offers support and a sense of cultural identity in an uncertain or hostile environment. As Bird notes, religion among minorities can be a basis for community solidarity, a means of preserving one's culture and language, and a way of coping with oppression in a racist society. In the case of Black, African, and Caribbean Christians, many found that white churches in the UK did not actively welcome them, and some turned to founding or joining Black-led churches. Similarly, evidence from Brierley shows a significant growth of new churches in London catering for specific languages and nationalities because of recent immigration. Religion can also be a means of easing the transition into a new culture by providing support and a sense of community for minority groups in their new environment. This is the explanation Herberg gave for high levels of religious participation amongst first-generation immigrants in the USA. Bruce sees a similar pattern in the history of immigration in the UK, where religion has provided a focal point for Irish, African Caribbean, Muslim, Hindu, and other communities. Price's study of the African Caribbean community in Bristol shows both cultural defence and cultural transition have been important. He argues that Pentecostalism is a highly adaptive religion of the oppressed that provides migrants with values appropriate to the new world in which they found themselves. Pentecostalism has helped African Caribbeans to adapt to British society, playing a kind of Protestant ethic role in helping its members succeed by encouraging self-reliance and thrift. It gave people mutual support and hope of improving their situation. Okay, so this slide kind of just talks about age differences in religion, but it's probably better to look at the table yourself rather than me try to describe it, if that makes sense. Boston Crockett suggests three possible explanations for age differences in religiosity. The aging effect. People turn to religion as they get older. For example, using evidence from the Kendall Project, Healers argues that people become more interested in spirituality as they age. As we approach death, we naturally become more concerned about spiritual matters in the afterlife. The period or cohort effect. People born during a particular period may be more likely or less likely to be religious because of the events they live through, such as war or a period of rapid social change. Secularisation. As religion declines in importance, each generation becomes less religious than the one before it. They argue that secularisation is the main reason why younger people are less religious than older people. They found that in each succeeding generation, only half as many people are religious compared to the generation before it. We are therefore likely to see a steadily aging population of churchgoers. In 2015, 1 in 3 were aged 65 and over. By 2030, this will be over 4 in 10, and without significant numbers of young people joining the congregations, within 2 or 3 generations, practicing Christians will have become a very small and very old minority of the UK population. Okay, so we've just hit the 2 hour mark, and I have one more topic, but this one's very small, and it is, of course, the final topic, which is ideology and science. Science has had an enormous impact on society over the last few centuries. Its achievements in medicine have eradicated many once fatal diseases. Many basic features of daily life, transport, communications, work, and leisure would be unrecognisable to our recent ancestors due to scientific and technological development. Perhaps most strikingly, science and technology have revolutionised economic productivity and raised our standard of living. This success has led to a widespread faith in science. More recently, this faith has been somewhat dimmed by recognition that science may cause problems as well as solve them. Pollution, global warming, and weapons of mass destruction are all much a product of science and technology, as are spaceflight, wonder drugs, and the internet. While science may have helped to protect us from natural dangers such as disease and famine, it has created its own manufactured risks that increasingly threaten the planet. Yet, in fact, both the good and the bad effects of science demonstrate the key feature distinguishing it from other belief systems or knowledge claims, that is, its cognitive power. In other words, science enables us to explain, predict, and control the world in a way that non scientific or pre scientific belief systems cannot do. According to Popper, science is an open belief system where every scientist's theories are open to scrutiny, criticism, and testing by others. Science is governed by the principle of falsificationism. That is, scientists set out to try and falsify existing theories, deliberately seeking evidence that disprove them. If the evidence from an experiment or an observation contradicts a theory and shows it to be false, the theory can be discarded, and the search for a better explanation can begin. In science, knowledge claims live or die by this evidence. In Popper's view, discarding falsified knowledge claims is what enables scientific understanding of the world to grow. Scientific knowledge is cumulative. It builds on the achievements of previous scientists to develop a greater understanding of the world around us. Sir Isaac Newton put it, "If I have been able to see so far, it is because I have stood on the shoulder of giants, that is, on the discovery of his predecessors." However, despite the achievements of greater scientists such as Newton, no theory is ever to be taken as definite truth. There is always a possibility that someone will produce evidence to disprove it. In Popper's view, the key thing about scientific knowledge is that it is not sacred or absolute truth. It can always be questioned, criticised, tested, and perhaps shown to be false. The functionalist Merton argues that science can only thrive as a major social institution if it receives support from other institutions and values. He argues that this first occurred in England because of the values and attitudes created by Protestant Reformation, especially Puritanism. Puritan beliefs encouraged scientific development because their this worldly calling promoted hard work and experimentation, and they saw studying nature to appreciate God's creation. Their emphasis on social welfare made them value science for its potential to improve living conditions through new technologies. Merton also argues that science as an institution or organized social activity needs, an ethos, or a set of norms that make scientists act in ways that serve the goal of increasing scientific knowledge. He identified four such norms, known as kudos for short for their initial letters. Communism. Scientific knowledge is not private property. Scientists must share it with the scientific community by publishing their findings, otherwise, knowledge cannot grow. Universalism. The truth or falsity of scientific knowledge is judged by universal, objective criteria, such as testing, and not by the race, sex, etc. of the scientist who produced it. Disinterestedness. Being committed to discovering knowledge for its own sake. Having to publish their findings makes it harder for scientists to practice fraud, since it enables others to check their claims. Organised skepticism. No knowledge claims is regarded as sacred. Every idea is open to questioning, criticism, and objective investigation. Horton distinguishes between open and closed belief systems. He sees science as an open belief system, one where knowledge claims are open to criticism and can be disproved by testing. By contrast, religion, magic, and many other belief systems are closed. That is, they make knowledge claims that cannot be successfully overturned. Whenever its fundamental beliefs are threatened, a closed belief system has a number of devices, or get-out clauses, that reinforce the system and prevent it from being disproved, at least in the eyes of its believer. These devices vary from one belief system to another. Self-sustaining beliefs. Polanyi argues that all belief systems have three devices to sustain themselves in the faces of apparently contradictory evidence. Circularity. Each idea in the system is explained in terms of another idea within the system, and so on. Subsidiary explanations. For example, if the oracle fails, it may be explained away due to incorrect use of the bend. Denial of legitimacy to rivals. Belief systems reject alternative worldviews by refusing to grant any legitimacy to their basic assumptions. Gunn argues that a mature science, such as geology, biology, or physics, is based on a set of shared assumptions that he calls a paradigm. The paradigm tells scientists what reality is like, what problems to study, and what methods and equipment to use, and what will count as evidence, and even what answers they should find when they conduct research. For most of the time, scientists are engaged in normal science, which Kuhn likens to puzzle solving. The paradigm lays down the broad outlines, and the scientist's job is to carefully fill in the details. Those who do so successfully are rewarded with bigger research grants, professorships, Nobel Prizes, and so on. Scientific education and training is a process of being socialized into faith in the truth of the paradigm, and a successful career depends on working with the paradigm. For these reasons, any scientist who challenges the fundamental assumptions of the paradigm is likely to be ridiculed and hounded out of the profession. Indeed, others in the scientific community will no longer regard them as a scientist overall. The only exceptions to this are during one of the rare periods that Kuhn describes as a scientific revolution, where faith in the truth of the paradigm has already been undermined by an accumulation of anomalies, results that the paradigm cannot account for. Only then do scientists become open to radically new ideas. Interpretivist sociologists argue that all knowledge, including scientific knowledge, is socially constructed, rather than being objective truth. It is created by social groups using the resources available to them. In the case of science, scientific facts are the product of shared theories or paradigms that tell them what they should expect to see and of the instruments they use. Norsetina argues that invention of new instruments, such as telescopes or microscopes, permits scientists to make new observations and construct or fabricate new facts. Similarly, she points out that what scientists study in the laboratory is highly constructed and far more removed from the natural world than they are supposedly studying. According to Bulger, scientists are engaged in the same process of making sense or interpreting the world as everyone else. When confronted by evidence from their observation and experiments, they have decided what it means. They do so by devising and applying theories or explanations, but then they have to persuade others to accept their interpretation. Other critical perspectives, such as Marxism and feminism, see scientific knowledge as far from pure truth. Instead, they regard it as serving the interests of the dominant groups. Thus, many advances in supposedly pure science have been driven by the need of capitalism for certain types of knowledge. For example, theoretical work on ballistics, the study of the path followed by objects under the influence of gravity, was driven by the need to develop new weaponry. Similarly, biological ideas have been used to justify both male domination and colonial expansion. In this respect, science can be seen as a form of ideology. Postmodernists also reject the knowledge claims of science to have the truth. In the view of Lyotard, for example, science is one of the number of meta-narratives or big stories that falsely claim to possess the truth. In Lyotard's view, science falsely claims to find the truth about how the world works as a means of progress to better society, whereas in reality, science is one more discourse or way of thinking that is used to dominate people. Similarly, rather like Marxists, some postmodernists argue that science has become techno-science, simply serving capitalist interests by producing commodities for profit. And then for this part, like when I was researching like the textbook and stuff, it was basically just repeating what we'd already said about Marxism, functionalism, feminism, hegemony, nationalism, the utopia concept and things like that. So refer back to these to help answer questions regarding ideologies and how this relates to beliefs in science and whatnot. And on that note, we have finally made it to the end. And if you are actually still listening at this point, I just want to say thank you so much for your support on this video, on other videos, whether this is the first time you're watching or the millionth time you're watching. Thank you so much for all the support. I really appreciate it. And if you do have your exams coming up, I wish you all the best. You're going to do amazing. Especially if you've made it to the end of this video. Um, Leave your feedback in the comments, leave new video ideas. I'm always up to feedback. Honestly, like, give me some constructive criticism, honestly. Like, I feel like everyone's so nice, which obviously I love, but there's got to be something else to say. But yeah, thank you so much, and I'll see you all in the next one.